welcome to China EVs and More, where my co-host, Lei Xing, and I will go over the week's most important and interesting news coming out of the China EV, AV, and mobility sectors. We will open the room up at around the 40-minute mark to anyone who's keen to ask us any questions. What Lei and I discussed today is based on our opinions and should not be taken as investment advice. If you enjoy this room, please help us get the word out to other enthusiasts, and of course, tune in again next week. My name is Tu Li. I am Managing Director at Sino Auto Insights, a Beijing-based consultancy that helps organizations bring innovative and tech-focused products and services to the transportation and mobility sectors. I write a free weekly newsletter that we pull many of our discussion topics from. You can sign up for it at sinoautoinsights.com, which of course, I encourage you all to do. Lei, can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, good morning to good evening from my side. I'm your co-host Lei Xing, former chief editor of China Auto Review. This is episode number 62. Happy Earth Day to you
Is
over
it Earth
there.
Day?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
We would have been talking about Auto China 2022 or the Beijing Auto Show had it not been for the COVID outbreak. So it's April 21st here, but remember 10 episodes ago, we started our countdown, 10 weeks till Auto China, and 10 weeks later, we're talking about production reboot. So that's how things have been. And speaking of production reboot, obviously we're talking about Shanghai and Tesla in particular, but of course many others. But if we sort of, roll around the Tesla earnings yesterday and its restarted production, that's been kind of the headlines recently.
Yeah. And I want to, and you be my sanity checker, keep me honest. There were some rumors that they had rallied, or Tesla had rallied about 8,000 people. There's no way they got 8,000 people to their factory. Number one. Number two, they're slowly coming back online. What Elon alluded to is that he's assuming that COVID will be in containment later this year, and he's going to make up those lost units over the course of the year. So he's still pretty confident that he can get to over 1.5 million units globally by the end of this year. But effectively, all of the factories were shut down for the better part of a month. And we're not just talking Tesla now, we're talking generally for all of the OEMs. Well,
Elon being Elon, I think the way he put it was Shanghai is back with a vengeance. So remember a couple of weeks ago when they had the cyber rodeo, I tweeted that he must be thinking about Shanghai right now. And 2 weeks later, the general feel is it's getting better. I think it seems that the worst, as far as number of cases, if you want to be sensitive, may have passed. The peak may have passed, but again, yes, it is a gradual process, and it's pressure test is done. I think some production is restarting, but it's not to the point of normal capacity yet. And we also just heard some OEMs in Guangzhou, part of their production or some production lines have been shut.
Right.
Guangzhou Honda, Guangzhou Toyota, obviously Xpeng's over there, but it's not going to be a light switch, right? And based on what we've heard from the comments from CPCA, right, they've been tracking weekly retail sales. It looks like it's pretty much a 30 to 35% down year over year, right? So April will be, it's actually better than I expected. I was thinking of 40, 50% off, but it looks like the priority of obviously the industry, the auto industry being a pillar industry of the economy, and we just saw the GDP numbers. I think the various commissions and ministries have been working, coordinating to make sure that production comes back. And there's various ways, closed loop, right? The Tesla is doing testing of employees twice a day. But remember the white list that the Shanghai published, what, a week ago or a few days ago? The caveat is no logistics companies were included in that list. So when we talk about logistics, there's logistics of shipping parts to the OEMs downstream, right? There's also the logistics of shipping the cars out of the factories. So I think this is the issue I think that has come up in recent days. So Tesla restarting production is a good sign, but there's tons of other issues to be
Yeah.
taken care of. I think that's the picture.
So the industry folks will call that inbound logistics when parts come into the factory, and then outbound logistics, and they're both over the road or OTR, meaning that trucks and trailers bring those parts into the factory, and then it could be trucks or it could be trains that take those cars and deliver them to their final destination, whether it's in China, in country, or to other parts of the world. In Europe, it's going to be a train, although they also use ships. So, to your point, Lei, not only is it the logistics companies, inbound and outbound, that are having some challenges, but the highways are restricted. And so you have to get these exceptions if you want to use certain highways. And so it's not as clean cut as, okay, we created this closed loop system. We're going to test everybody multiple times a day and get everybody back online. There's knock on effects when they restricted everything. And when I say restricted everything, I mean everything. And so those have to open back up as well. And so currently, what's happening is in ShanghaiGiga, people are getting sleeping bags and are effectively sleeping on the factory floor when they're not working. And so the high tech companies that are based in Shanghai, they have dorms. A lot of them, I think Pegatron, I think those guys have dorms where their workers can go to sleep. But I think at some of these other factories that were never meant to be, dorms or living quarters, they have to get a bit more creative.
Yeah, so restarting production is one thing, but restarting production back to the normal pattern or normal capacity is entirely something else. Because Tesla is producing right now. I think they're depending on the parts inventory that they have, and like many others. But once those run out, then you depend on, right, the your suppliers in the surrounding areas as well as across the country. And if that don't go smooth, then we might. I just don't know. We could have additional hiccups going forward.
I don't think there's any question we're going to have additional hiccups, because the fact of the matter is you're not going to beat COVID. There's one person could send the entire supply chain into another restriction.
As in the case of Wuhu, right? They had
Yeah,
one case, and basically the city went into a pseudo lockdown.
right. Yeah, and this is where you had mentioned GAC in Guangzhou. Toyota is actually feeling it pretty bad because they're in Jilin and they're also in Guangzhou. So Volkswagen's feeling it really bad because they're in Shanghai and they're in Jilin. So looking at just from an OEM standpoint, the challenges are many, and we don't hear about the SOEs too much, but they're also having challenges as well. And I think you and I had both heard about a near miss in Ningda, which would have probably shut the whole sector down effectively. But that's been remedied, I've been told. So,
But Tesla is really lucky in the sense that if we heard from the earnings calls, obviously Berlin and Texas will be ramping up. Had they not had those two additional plants, they would have been in big trouble. I mean, at least in the short term. If the capital markets are looking at the quarterly numbers, but based on what Elon said, he said basically Q2 deliveries will be roughly on par, maybe a little bit lower than Q1. So that's an indication, right? of the effect, but I don't know. I don't know whether Shanghai can really catch up that quickly and how fast the other two new plants are ramping up. But he seemed confident, right? 60, good chance to grow 60% this year, over 900,000 whatever units.
The Berlin Giga and Austin Giga give Tesla a ton of flexibility that others do not have. Okay. And so there is increased scrutiny and pressure on the Berlin Giga team and the Austin Giga team. But the model mix might be different, right? Because Shanghai Giga only builds standard range Ys and threes. Now, was that always going to be, excuse me, the strategy for Austin and Berlin, or were they going to do long range? So changing the model mix from a production standpoint changes everything from an order standpoint, number one, and it changes everything from a factory and a manufacturing standpoint. So if we're looking at Shanghai Giga, they're talking about 10,000 jobs a week. So 10,000 times 50 weeks is 500,000 cars, right? So that makes a ton of sense. And we're looking at Tesla, the speed of the line is at the same pace as a traditional legacy automaker. At least one job a minute, 60 jobs an hour, 70 jobs an hour. So they're running with the bulls on the manufacturing side. So it's taking them a lot of effort to do that. And you think about Neo Lay and how they're just getting back online and they're only really building 10,000 cars a month, right? So it's a lot different. The degree of difficulty for a Toyota, a GM, a Volkswagen, a Tesla is going to be so different than a Neo or an Xpeng.
Would you say that, I mean, NEO, we talked about this many times, it's a big product year for them. They're sort of overproportionally affected by this outbreak because they have this added complexity, maybe? Would you say that?
Yeah.
Because they're under a lot of pressure to deliver literally and figuratively, right?
Yeah.
And now they announced this, production suspension.
And then everything is a negotiation with JAC, right? Let's say that they're very closely aligned. That's not the issue. But Neo is going to feel completely helpless if a JAC employee is their directly responsible individual to get production back up. And they can't do or say anything themselves because JAC might own the relationship with the supplier. They might own the relationship with the factory, right? And so Neo as a customer to JAC, that's where you feel the helplessness, right? But if I'm Neo in the Silicon Valley Apple days, people are living at the JAC factory. Neo badged employees are living at that JAC factory, making sure that everything is being done to get everybody back online, right? And they're doing assessments every day. So materials meeting every morning and every afternoon, likely, to make sure that the inventory levels that are being reported are accurate, right? Because let's say, for instance, Lay, you say in the system there's 50 seats for the ES6, but there's only 48 because there's a quality issue with two of them. So now, instead of planning to build 50 ES6s, I'm too short and the line goes down, right? And I could have just ordered two more if the inventory numbers were accurate. But now, when you have inventory, that becomes less of an issue. But if you're getting fed hand to mouth, and when we say that, we mean that Lay is shipping me the parts at JAC and I'm putting them, they're not even sitting for an hour. I'm putting them right on the vehicle. So there's probably some circumstances where parts are getting sent and they're getting put right away onto the vehicle. And so and this is where the purchasing guys, the material guys, the logistics guys, they earn their keep because it is a complicated dance that everybody has to play their part in the time frame that's needed, right? Anybody that's a little late, a little early, the dance gets ruined. So
that's exactly what's happening, right? You need not everyone is in tune right now, and there's the kind of the policy or the whitelist, whatever the government level departments have to coordinate. And then there's the national level. We also heard from Liu He, right, talking about the logistics, keeping the logistics running. And then I think Li Auto put out a statement saying that April deliveries will be affected, to the users.
And Lei, we don't get into the details about this stuff too much, but this should be mentioned really quickly. The central government that resides in Beijing and Shanghai are sometimes at opposing sides in how to manage this a little bit. And so that's kind of been why there's been this confusing response to COVID. But it's getting better, I was told. And it's that five degree or 5 stages of acceptance. So you say it's getting better. I think the numbers are actually kind of stabilizing. They're not reducing. They've reduced for a day or two and then they spike back up. But I almost feel that this is like stage 2 or stage 3, like acceptance. Like, this is we're on lockdown. Everybody was upset at the very beginning, but now it's kind of I'm just going to try to make the best of it because it's the way it's going to be, right? Because 4 days was never a reality, right? Closing down Pudong for 4 days, closing down Puxi for 4 days, that was never a reality. And so I just feel in my WeChat, they've just kind of, okay, how do we move forward now? So
this kind of makes me think back a month ago when we had the recording with Elliot Richards of Fully Charged. He's based in Shanghai, and we started that recording by talking about COVID, and he was kind of on a lockdown for a few days, and we were talking about what it would look like going forward. And lo and behold, it was turned out to be much worse than expected. So, in retrospect,
and we've only been talking the production and manufacturing side, right, Lei? The
right.
demand side, because you're saying CPCA said it's down 30%. So that makes a ton of sense to me. Shanghai is the largest city in China. Jilin, another 25 million people. So I don't know if they're 30% of sales, but a good portion, a good percentage. So that makes sense. 30% is actually pretty good. Like you said, I agree with you. I thought it'd be more severe. But if I'm Volkswagen and I already had problems selling my ID series in China, I am pulling my hair out saying, man, any momentum we had, we've lost. And you know that if and when, let's not say if, when COVID gets contained here, there's going to be a mad scramble to try to steal customers from other people or other companies. So if you can't build that momentum back up very quickly, you're going to see incentives getting thrown out there within 60 days probably, because
Yeah, I mean, we've seen the numbers, right? The CNAV post ranking bar chart that was tweeted quite often of comparison of these legacy EV sales. But going back to the Tesla earnings a little bit, I thought it was one of the interesting things. We talk about AVs. Part of it is Elon again said something. I quote: "Aspire to reach volume production of the robotaxi in 2024." And I was like, what happened to your robotaxi of the Teslas? Now you're going to launch with a robotaxi with maybe LiDARs or something? Yeah. And everything, you have to watch that key word, right? We aspire, hopefully. So that was interesting. But
the other thing really quickly was we're going to grow 50% year over year for the next several years.
Yeah. 20 million by what? End of the decade? A year?
Yeah.
So they're only, he said, we're only 5% of the way.
Yeah.
And, but I mean, we generally, I think the earnings, right, mad beat. And if we look, the Chinese press often compare with these Chinese smart EV startups. And, right, Tesla is still the the benchmark, right?
They're still the catfish.
Over 30% margins minus the regulatory credit sales, right? What NIO does over 20%. So Tesla is still, 10 percentage higher.
Tesla margin is Apple margin. Apple
Yeah,
margin is normally 32, 35%, 29 to 35%.
right. And I mean, part of it, obviously, I think also, I tweeted out that CATL unveiled their annual report, and their sales booked with Tesla in 2021 was 13 billion renminbi.
Yeah.
Remember, they have that deal to supply LFP batteries for 2022 to 2025. So they're just getting
Yep.
started. And the earnings deck said something about half of the first quarter production were LFPs, nearly half. I'm sure those two things were related. And, margins, yeah.
Those guys are joined at the hip. If Tesla has a hiccup, CATL is it's gonna reverberate.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
But just crazy numbers in terms of earnings. But Q2 likely will be hit somewhat, I think, because of April will be a bad month. But other than that, we're talking about FSD and all these plans that are still on track. I mean, Elon, he felt he's never been more confident. So
yeah, the numbers speak for themselves. Do they still deserve this $1 trillion valuation? That remains to be seen, and I'll speculate on that. But anybody would be envious of the numbers that he's touting out, right? Or that he's reporting out. I mean, for God's sakes, 50% growth over the next several years. Let's not talk about supply. Let's just talk about the only limiting factor is how many factories he can build, right? Or how much capacity he can build. That's the limiting factor. The limiting factor, if he's saying
the machine that builds the machine.
Yeah, exactly. But that made me curious about his statement though, Lei, when he said robotaxi in 2024, that 2030 number. How many robotaxis as a percent of total production is getting me to that 20 million number?
So speaking of 2024, remember earlier this year, both Mobileye and GM announced they were launching something called a consumer AV. Something I take it to mean something that you can buy privately own with L4 capabilities. And Deep Route just announced something recently that they're trying to launch. They already have deals equipping some of the models, including the Rising Auto
Lincoln.
Yeah, the Lincoln MKZ, the Rising Auto Marvel R, and the Geely Geometry A. And the plan is to launch something in 2024 with L4 capabilities using that $10,000 stack. And
for solid state LiDAR, right?
I think it was two.
Three or four.
Yeah, but and using two different suppliers, right?
Yes.
For any of you who might have missed, you can refer back to our conversation with CEO Maxwell Joe.
That was a good one. That was entertaining.
Yeah. So now it looks like it's coming into play. And but he did say, if I remember correctly, that 2026 would be the year when the robotaxi that Tesla refers to, right? Whatever, how much you pay per mile will be down to a certain level. He said 2026 will be the year that you will see this go into scale.
And he said that the main bottleneck was the price of the hardware software stack. So
right. So other than that, I think we heard about BYD working with Horizon Robotics. Interesting that BYD so far this year, BYD has teamed up with NVIDIA, right?
Yep.
BYD's invested into Horizon Robotics. They're a strategic.
Yeah, they're an investor. They're an investor.
So what wasn't surprising that they would be working together. And also BYD was working with both Momenta and Baidu. So I think on the AV front, BYD has been more active than basically any time before.
I feel like they're Geely active, like they're really active.
Yeah. And I guess it's interesting that they're working with both Horizon and NVIDIA for some of the automated driving features.
I look at it a little bit differently because I feel a couple things here. Number one, I don't know if Horizon's ready for the big time. It takes a long time to develop the type of chip,
Yeah.
the AI chip that they're looking at to compete toe to toe with a Mobileye, a Qualcomm, or an Nvidia.
NVIDIA is still the gold standard.
Yeah. And then having BYD as a strategic investor is a huge win because BYD, what do they do? One of the main things is build chips, right? Or design chips and fab chips. So that's a huge strategic partner for them, right? And so the OEMs, they're just dual qualifying. They're qualifying a Western chip company, a Qualcomm, a Mobileye, or an Nvidia. And then they're also going to be qualifying Horizon whenever it is available in mass production. And so I see that as a kind of a CY cover your ass, right? We're going to keep on using NVIDIA until we don't. Okay. So NVIDIA is watching that very closely. But I also look at it as like if BYD, and we know that they do, has grand ambitions to enter Europe, the United States, they might not be able to use a Horizon chip in the foreign markets. So it does make sense to have them dual qualify dual sources. But how it affects the rest of their system, their hardware software stack, is up for debate. I don't know yet.
Yeah, but so based on the presser, BYD is the first to announce that they're using the Journey 5 chips. But the presser said that Horizon's already basically they've already talked to a lot of other customers and looks like the announcements are forthcoming. And the Journey 2, by the way, are being used on the Li Auto 1, the 2021 one.
Yes.
So we're going to be seeing more of these announcements. And
yeah. And there are other chip design companies in China that we'll bring them up in the coming episodes, just so you all know. But SMIC and Horizon, can you think of any others that really dominate the discussion when it comes to China chip design companies? Like, yeah, pretty much, right? That's the only ones that get any airtime effectively in the Western media. So
no Beijing Auto Show this week, but within 2 days, we've seen 5 EV debuts, and they're all from the legacy premium brands, interestingly enough. The Audi Urban Sphere, the Mercedes EQS SUV, BMW i7, Lexus RZ, and the Lincoln Star. What do you think? What's your what was your favorite? That was the Beijing Auto Show, basically.
Yeah, basically, right. So here's my but, because I really enjoyed the design and appreciate the design of Audi vehicles. I think they're really, they look great. But this Urban Sphere is a head scratcher to me. It's a minivan, and I've ripped it on Twitter, so
I'd say it's an MPV style.
Oh yeah, okay. I mean, but we're arguing semantics a little bit, right? So,
and it's led, a lot of it, the interior design is led by China. So
yeah, which is perplexing to me because the one thing that really tweaks me a little bit is that they called it an urban vehicle. Like, this is not an urban vehicle. Urban vehicles are small. It's a cruiser. It's a luxury cruiser, right? It's like got all these captain's chairs and stuff like that. I don't know why they would call it an urban sphere, right? I just think the world is moving in the opposite direction. Do you think Shanghai downtown is going to have a bunch of those cars on the road? And remember, Lei, you can remember this well, like it's yesterday. Most people, like the rest of the world, there's only one person in the car. There might be two, but that driver doesn't count.
I remember Audi at the Volkswagen Group Night in Auto Shanghai 2019. They had that concept that looked pretty much the same. The interior, how the seat were designed with the teleporting steering wheel. I mean, they had that a long time ago. That made me remember back then. But
You look at it and then you compare it to the Lincoln
Star,
Star. And the Lincoln Star had all these, they had the frunk, they had all these different design concepts that they're testing out, right? And I don't know if I saw any of that in the Audi, right? It was just still an electric autonomous van. Weren't we talking about that 3 years ago? What are you bringing to the table outside of autonomous features and luxury, right? Like, it's a concept car. Stretch yourselves. And so at least the EQSS, it came with the goods, the technology, right? The range, right? You can argue that it looks like a pulled out, stretched Aston Martin a little bit, or like what's that car in Cars? The race car in Cars. It looks a little bit like that. I don't know. What did you think? What did you think?
if you look at the some of the videos that they put up for Audi, the three sphere concepts really have one common thread, which is again going back to L4 automated driving. Is they're trying to say, you know, down the road within this decade, actually, starting from so Audi has the Artemis project and Volkswagen has the what Trinity. So those are the cars which I referred earlier to as the CAVs, the consumer AVs. And what they're trying to show is they can be your everyday vehicles. You can drive them, but at certain times they can be L4 and turn into lounges. I think that's their whole point of these sphere concepts.
Right.
Whereas I guess for the other, talking about Lincoln, by the way, right? It's hard to believe that this is actually their first ever pure EV concept. Hard to believe. And then they're coming out with basically over the next few years, one every year, right? One production vehicles. And you can bet they'll be produced in China because China is already the largest market in Lincoln. I would have liked the sort of the Lincoln Z being their first EV. I would have liked that, but I guess you go with the SUV first.
That Zephyr is beautiful. So
Yeah.
I really like that vehicle. They did a good job with that.
And I think what you were talking about that something was missing is the Audi concepts probably were missing the BMW theater screen. That's what we're missing. And
with Amazon
yeah, Fire, yeah. You know, if you look at the front of the i7, the first model I thought of was the Neo ET7 or the ET5. Because of those slanted headlights.
Yes.
Go back and compare, right? They look kind of similar. But then that big kidney grill gave it away, right? You know that's a BMW.
So I was just half joking with a WeChat group of car enthusiasts, and I was like, "This is a German version of a Dodge," because it's all black and kind of boxy square. That's the thing that gives me the head scratcher. Lay is that Audi just I didn't read all the details of the urban sphere, but dude, come with a 31-inch screen. Come on, man.
And then if you look at some of the common threads is the EQS, right, and the EQS SUV, all of the EQs, right, at least the high end ones, and the Lincoln Star have a huge screen.
Yes.
In the front, right? That's become the kind of the standard. And I thought BMW, obviously, also being a German premium brand, is following the footsteps of Mercedes with the L3 capabilities.
This is a risk for BMW. They're going to build that i7 as a petrol vehicle or a 7 Series, as a hybrid, and a fully electric. So they are really, really trying to stretch this out. And I think that could be really, first of all, think of how complex that factory is going to be, building all three powertrains on the same line. It's just, and if you're a design engineer or an engineer for BMW, what is your priority, right? While others have come on board, Ford's come on board, BYD's come on board, the trend is I'm going to cut this off sooner rather than later. BMW is doing the exact opposite. And remember, guys, this is the company that brought us the i3 and the i8. So they were early in the game, and then they bobbled and dropped it.
I mean, the design direction wise, right? The recent model launches have been somewhat of head scratcher.
Yeah. Well, and to be another key point here, like let's assume because I believe you are a fan of the German traditionally the German automakers and the design of their vehicles, but you can't price them twice as much or 30% higher, 40% higher than a Li Auto L9. You can't price. You're not going to get that premium in China. You're just not. And so if the L9 comes out at $65,000 and then an X7 or an iX5 comes out at 90,000 US dollars, what are we getting? We're getting a half-built electric vehicle built on top of a powertrain, on top of an ICE platform, because BMW has not shifted completely over to an electric platform. So it just becomes a really hard sell, I think, right? Now we're just talking marketing and customers' needs and demand, right? I just don't know. I think the decision making is a bit perplexing as well.
Yeah, and we sometimes talk of this in WeChat groups. The Chinese smart EV startups have re-established what being premium means. So when you think about these EVs that are coming out, and you tend to, maybe us, we tend to compare immediately with the offerings that the startups are putting out there, and you kind of wonder, why would I, choose a BMW or a Mercedes over a Neo or a Xpeng or a Li Auto, and that's kind of been the narrative, I think.
We should note that it's only been in the last 10, 12, 14 months, Lay, that the German management have really even acknowledged a Neo exists, an Xpeng exists, right? Because they've always traditionally over the last 3, 4, 5 years have exclusively targeted Tesla. Wallenstein, he admitted Neo is a bogey, right? And so let's turn this around a little bit because I took some notes. Xpeng opened its third store in Denmark. And so
They announced the pricing in the 4
yes.
different markets, a bit higher than what they sell in China, obviously. Yeah.
So I wrote this down because in China the P5 is around $35,000 to $45,000, right?
Yeah.
Denmark $57,000. The Netherlands $52,000.
You
And
did
Norway,
uh-huh.
yeah, in Norway it's 43,000, and then in Sweden it's 58,000. That's a lot of money.
But that'll be fine,
But I don't know why there's such a huge delta between Norway and Denmark and Sweden. To be quite frank, maybe the subsidies, but it can't be, can it?
I don't know. We'll have to look into that. But there seems to be quite a bit of gap, huh?
Yeah, it's a huge delta. I mean, it's what 40%, 30%, and at some point in time, they're going to need to create a fairly uniform pricing structure for Europe because outside of I think all of these countries, and this is me being very American. I'm not sure. The Netherlands for sure is using the euro, but I believe these other 3 countries are still using their own currency.
Corner, yeah.
Kroner, right? So for the rest of Europe that is using the euro, they're definitely going to have to come up with a more uniform pricing. Otherwise, if you live in Belgium, Lay, and it costs you $60,000 or 60,000 euro, you could go to the Netherlands and buy it and drive it back, right? I'm sure there's a restriction on doing that, but there would be huge arbitrage opportunities if they can't get this pricing more uniform, right?
And then I guess Lexus was quite clear. I mean, Lexus, the Japanese, the very Japanese feel. They touted their exclusive technologies, direct force, steer-by-wire, the driving signature. I know what they're talking about because my father, he drives a Lexus, and he
Nice.
had a 450H in Weihai when he used to go back and forth. Somebody else is taking care of that car right now since he can't go back. But
But
Lexus is
Lexus,
something different.
I want to say Lexus is actually pretty affordable in China, like relatively.
Yeah, and yeah, that's
Let me promote my half an hour show that I had. I was a guest on John McElroy's Autoline, and it just posted on YouTube. And so, John, I know he's a legend in the United States, in the US auto industry. He's interviewed every CEO for the past 25, 30 years. And so, but he's a super humble guy, super knowledgeable, and we met virtually last year or 2 years ago, and we just kind of keep each other honest, take notes. And so he invited me on with Michael Dunn. Michael Dunn's also very well known in the industry, worked here, lived here, now in San Diego. So we just had a conversation about foreign automakers, a little bit about Neo, a little bit about Volkswagen, actually a lot about Volkswagen, and kind of talked about what the legacies are doing. Do they rely too much on China? And what do they need to do to be successful here? So, a lot of what we talk about, but a bit broader and kind of implications for the US as well. So, I invite you all to go onto YouTube and do a search for Autoline. I think it's called Foreign Automakers in China or something like that. So, one thing I wanted to get your take on is GAC Ion launching a swap station. So, what have you heard? Have you heard anything else about that? And how aggressive they're going to be?
no, I haven't looked into it, but I mean, is that surprising?
Yeah. But that's mostly for fleet, right? Or is it for private passenger vehicle?
I haven't looked into the details, but if you look at Neo is already obviously they have more than 900 now. Evergo just launched their first 4 in Xiamen, but that's mostly for fleets, and Alltown is mostly for fleets.
Right.
So I haven't looked into the GAC Ion yet, but you're gonna see more of these announcements coming from various players.
It's we should say that right now they are neck deep in trying to get production back up. And so they're trying to walk and chew gum at the same time effectively,
Yeah.
still trying to promote their international operations while they try to restart production, which is, oh man, being in these companies is probably very hectic right now.
Yeah. So what would be interesting, going back to the battery swap, is what Elon said last night was they do plan opening up their supercharger network, right? In not only in Europe, which is already open, but in the US and maybe the rest of the world. What would be interesting is really kind of to see whether we will be having these interoperable and changeable battery swaps across different brands.
I take this as a confidence in Tesla's brand, like from Elon saying, you know what, we're going to be fine. Tesla's going to be fine. We don't need this feature to be exclusive anymore.
We did see somebody post a Tesla being charged at a Neo
Yeah.
supercharger. I don't remember where that was, but right.
I think it was Europe somewhere, right? I think it was Europe somewhere.
Europe? Was it in Europe?
Yeah. And then the other thing too is about the supercharger. Will there be one particular brand or two particular brands that directly benefit from having that supercharger, right? Like for instance, is there a brand out there that most customers are like, man, if it had its own charging network or if it had a bunch of superchargers, I'd love to buy this thing, right? So is there going to be one or two brands that really get a lift because now these charging stations are all accessible to them, right? Because I could see the Ford F-150 getting a lift from that because maybe you guys don't know, April 26th is when production starts.
Next week, yep. Job one.
For the F-150. And we've seen the cover of Bloomberg last week with Farley inside an F-150 Lightning. So I think for those that haven't seen it and haven't read the article, it's worth a read. You know, I kind of talked about it a little bit in my newsletter. There's a lot of things
I'm super proud that the chief engineer behind it was originally from China,
Dude,
Linda Zhang.
you should, I mean, you should put a poster up for your daughter saying, you know what, she was 8 years old, first time in a car
Yeah,
in the US, right? Like
that's a great connection.
that is that is my family story, right? I'm 100% American, but because I was the youngest in my family when we came here in 1975, and I'm showing my age, but but my sister was around that age, and to to say it is definitely inspirational. And I wrote that in the newsletter that she's a woman and that she's Asian. Those two things for the F-150.
The best selling car vehicle in the US, right?
And you and I are getting on our soapboxes a little bit, but this is how important that vehicle is to Ford. $40 billion a year of revenue is generated from that one product.
Yeah, I would say it's even more important than the Mach-E.
Yeah. The only other single product that outsells it is the iPhone. And Ford sells about 900 to a million of those things a year.
Yeah.
And not 85% of their profit or 90% of their profit comes from that F-150. So whoever decided to appoint her as the chief engineer of the F-150, kudos to that person, because it took huge balls to do that, right? The car is going to be sold at $40,000 as a starting price. So it should open a lot of new demand. And no, the article's great. It talks about the challenges because current F-150 buyers are, I think, like 80% white male. So, and they're doing a BMW, right? They're doing an ICE version of F-150 for a long time, and they're going to
Yeah.
do an EV version. So, I God bless Jim Farley, because I love it. You got to come out of the gates fighting. I think I hope the Silverado does well. I hope everybody does well, right? I mean, there's no reason for me to hate on anybody, right? Just like you, we
Yeah.
you said it great. I think you said we praise when we see it's deserved, and we criticize when it's merited, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah. We're not sponsored by anybody. So yeah,
I think we could be, but we haven't really
well,
tried either.
I
So
mean, yeah.
but yeah, that's all the notes. Well, let me for selfish reasons. What did you think of the EQSS, the Audi Urban? Let me ask you what you thought about the Urban Sphere, because you obviously know how I felt.
I didn't like it in terms of design. I thought, the Sky Sphere was kind of cool, where the car can be extended or retracted, right? Turn it into a GT, and then things like that. But these are, I mean, these are just to prove a point, to show what could be possible. But
Yeah.
how, I mean, it's anybody's. What's the way there's different hamlets? Well, what's the
Oh,
uh, you know what I'm
there's
saying?
different ways. There's different ways to skin a cat.
Yeah. It's you might see it one way, I might see it one way, somebody else might see it another way. So
For sure, for sure. One thing I did want to ask you, because I actually wrote it down. Do you know why? And I can't find out any specific reason. So March sales, we saw that chart you said, right, where Neo was like 9,000, Tesla was at 38,000, and then the Mercedes, but then Audi was at like 100 and something units. Do you know why they went so low so fast?
I I just say it would be a demand thing more than anything else,
Okay,
because
because that's effectively zero demand.
guess that it's the e-tron. The e-tron is one of the first to be put on the market by a legacy premium, right? There was
Yeah,
the iPace? That was one of the earliest ones. E-tron, I think, was very early, quite
yeah.
early, 2018 or 19. right.
18?
Just didn't seem to catch on. Neither was the EQS or the
Yeah.
iX3, and they've had quality issues.
So I have a friend. Did I say this last week? I had a friend who ordered an EQS, or his father ordered an EQS in the Netherlands. And originally, when he ordered it, he said that there's 3 to 4 month. He got a response from Mercedes that there's a 3 to 4 month wait to deliver his EQS to him, and he got it in less than a month and a half or 2 months. So that tells me that demand isn't where they want it to be for the EQS globally. It looks like, or at least in Europe and
Well,
China.
you
So
know, now that I mean, speaking of EQ, right? Mercedes, they've just seems that recently their EQ lineup just ballooned, right? They've basically completed. The only
mm-hmm.
one more that's coming is the EQE SUV, but everything else has been either announced
Sure.
or launched. And
I'm, I'm making a bold prediction, Lay. They're gonna rename all of these cars because the EQS SUV, the EQS sedan. I
they
don't
wouldn't
know.
call
It's
it the EQSS. uh,
they paid design agencies or branding agencies a ton of money probably to come up with these names, right? And they're like, oh, what about the EQSS? Yeah, this is great.
but seriously, last week I didn't expect to be talking about reproduction this week. So in that sense, it's gotten better. But then when you go back further to when they announced the lockdowns, 5 days in Puxi and 5 days in Pudong, and now looking at what happened.
These announcements are as much a signal to the markets that China is not shut down,
It,
that they're open for business. I feel it has less to do with the individual automakers and more about the general economy and the
right,
market.
that and the fact what I mentioned that the auto industry is really a big part of the GDP. Okay, upstream and downstream,
Yeah.
right? The number of jobs affected, and how they affects the economy. So you can be sure that this is a priority at the very high levels. If EVs, if battery swap, if these things are mentioned in the government work report, then you can bet that high up they're working to coordinate.
So, reliable source, and you had mentioned this last week, there are over 40 cities in various forms of restriction or lockdown, totaling almost 300 million people. So, that is not going to be resolved in a week. And so
Months.
I sound like a yeah, I sound like a broken record, Lay, but we talked about this at the beginning of last year, right? We talked about the chip issue, we talked about COVID, less about COVID, but supply chain issues, right? So everything's just a mixed bag of challenges that creates a huge mess. That's going to take months to get
Yeah. So
out from
so the
under.
latest from CPCA I just read somewhere is that so Q2 will be bad relatively, and this is not only the EVs but the entire passenger vehicle market. Q2 will be bad, and for the whole year, I think CPCA is expecting zero growth.
Mm.
But this is the entire market. But for EVs, I think we should be able to see not the 6 million units, but we should still be able to see growth not only in terms of volume but penetration. So 20% could be a
Mm-hmm.
possibility, but volume wise, it's not as
So
yeah.
so so I think a general number that we can look at is almost 500,000 units. We lose a month of production. We lose 500,000 units of demand or supply from the EV side. So if we're looking at 6 million units in January, maybe we're looking at 5.5 million now.
That's still pretty optimistic.
Optimistic? Yeah. Agreed. But
China always surprises.
it
Right?
does. So
Good or bad, it always surprises.
I was looking at this lay. I'm always kind of negative, and I was like, okay, but it always crushes my prediction.
Well,
so.
you need to be more negative. So everything works out.
But again, we're still only in April, so we have a ton of time to make up units. But before June, things need to really, really be managed well. Shanghai needs to be 80% open.
This is so much different than Wuhan because back then it was pretty much Wuhan was the center of, right? And now Shanghai is sort of the Wuhan, but really there's a lot more places that are facing similar.
There's two or three Wuhans right now.
That's the difference.
That brings us to the end of this week's show. Lei and I thank you for tuning in. My name is Tu Lee, and you can find me on Twitter at Sino Auto Insight. That's SinoAutoInsight. You can find Lei on Twitter at LeiXing77. That's LEIXING77. If you wouldn't mind rating and or reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you grab your podcast from, we'd appreciate that as well. Even better, if you enjoy this show, please tell your friends about it. Please join us again next week as we track down all the latest news on China, EVs, and more.